So now imagine that we have this very long string, or even very much longer string, which shows a kind of a paragraph or a very long text. It has thousands of words in it, and it's a kind of an article for a website. And you want to search for a word inside it and see whether it has a number. So in order to do that, this function is actually very useful that I'm going to talk about. You want to see whether a kind of a word or character exists inside a very long text. Here we use another kind of a statement. So it's an if statement, and it uses the Boolean true or false in order to see whether a word exists inside of this very long string, which is actually a text. And it helps you very much. It helps you develop a kind of a SEO-based or SEO-based applications. And notice that some of these SEO-based applications use these kind of very simple functions in order to see how many words, how many of, for example, hello exist inside this paragraph, okay, or a text or an article. And by counting the number of these words, it understands whether it has an SEO friendly kind of a text or not. So SEO is not the subject of our own tutorial, but this is one of the very famous applications that you can write using this very simple function that I'm going to teach you. And these are the basics of Python, but notice that all these basics are very useful in software when you want to write a kind of an application. Even this len function here is going to help you a lot in order to have some data, in order to get some data from your string. Later we're going to do some operations on the string. For example, we're going to slice them, or we're going to concatenate them. This is for very useful for data management, or whether you want to do some kind of a process of encrypting data, which is most of the time in, or almost always in, a string. Okay, so let's get into the main subject of our tutorial. So as I said, we want to see, for example, this exists in very long string. So in order to check that, we can print whether it exists or not. The result is going to be a Boolean. So we want to see whether the word or the string this exists in very long string. We write is, and it's going to check whether this exists in very long string. The result here is going to be Boolean. It's going to be whether false or true. So let's save the code and see what happens. Let me just comment all of these prints so that we focus on the result of this print. And it says false. Let's see why it's showing false, because we have this. We have the word this inside very long string. So let's see what we've done wrong here. Okay, the problem here is that we shouldn't use is, and instead we should use in. And here in is going to show you whether it has in inside of your string, which is very long string. So let's save the code and rerun it. Okay, it says true. So so most of the time we have is for other operations related to Boolean. But here, if we want to see whether something exists in another thing, a string exists in another string, or a character exists in another string, And by the way, character is each one of these parts of the strings, whether it's a letter, word, or an exclamation mark, or any other kind of mark there is, and we call it character. Sometimes we want to check whether a character exists. Sometimes the other times we want to know whether a string exists in another long string, and it can be simply be declared to us or become obvious using the in statement. So something is inside another thing, we can simply use this operation in, and it's going to show us true or false. And we can also use this true or false returnings for our if statements. For example, you can write it this way. You can write if this in very long string, we can print that this exists in very long string. So let's save it and run it. It says this exists in very long string. Okay, so all of these true or falses are going to show us the way we can handle our different items. And if, for example, you have that kind of application that I told you earlier about SEO and SEO friendly, and those tools that I told you about, you can simply use this if statement and check whether it exists. This kind of important, for example, key phrase, whether it's a this or something else, is going to, for example, tell the user that, for example, you need to use this, which is the keyword. Okay, this actually we don't use this as a keyword, but for example, if there is another keyword, for example, language as a keyword, and or for example programming language, and it checks whether programming language exists in that kind of a string, it tells the user, for example, it doesn't exist or it exists. And if it doesn't exist, it shows a kind of a warning that you need to use it in your article more number of times, or it doesn't even exist. So it's a very useful kind of statement, and we most usually use it inside the if statement. There are also moments that we want to see whether something does not exist in another thing, and this is not very much useful because, for example, if we want to see whether something exists, where if it shows false, then we're going to do the same thing that we wanted. For example, we want to see if this not in, actually we need to write it outside of the quotation marks, not in a very long string, print this doesn't exist in very long string. But we know that this is does exist in very long string. So there are moments that we want to make our code much simpler or much easier to write. We use not in, but in is very much more useful. Okay, but using not in, it's showing something vice versa, because if we want to look for something, whether it exists or not, and it shows that it is not in there, then it's going to throw a warning. So for example, we can write warning, this does not exist in very long string. So it says this exists in very long string, but it doesn't say that this does not exist in very long string. So if, for example, if I use it instead of this, because it doesn't exist in very long string, it's going to say the same. So here let me write it instead of this, and later I'm going to show you how you can get this item be printed out directly using a variable without me changing the it statement here, okay? The it word here or string here. But this is it is not the subject of this part of tutorial, and so if you didn't understand it, don't worry, I'm going to explain you later. Okay, let's save the code and rerun it. Okay, it says this exists in very long string, warning, it does not exist in very long string. Okay, and if you want to, for example, if you say it does not exist in very long string, it's going to have another kind of meaning. The user will say what is it. But if you want to declare the word it does not exist in very long string, you can use these apostrophes for it to say that it's referring to the word, not it itself. Okay, and you can also do the same for this.